the 2016 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. Brought to you from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. The Republican race for the 3rd Congressional District.
Good evening. I'm Condace Pressley, broadcast journalist and news manager for WSB Radio. Welcome to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, originating from GPB Studios in Atlanta. This is the debate among the Republican candidates in Georgia's 3rd Congressional District. The 3rd Congressional District covers most of west central Georgia. It includes Carroll, Cayuga, Meriwether, and parts of Fayette County. Now, let's meet the candidates on this very full slate. They are, in alphabetical order, Samuel Anders, an active member of the United States Air Force, where he has been a Master Sergeant for 16 years and is the East Coast Field Service Manager for Sinclair Systems International. Mike Crane is a licensed general contractor in Georgia. He owns his own construction company. Drew Ferguson is a family dentist and the mayor of his hometown, West Point, Georgia. Chip Flanegan has more than 35 years' experience as a business owner. He is from Stockbridge, Georgia. Richard Mix is an entrepreneur and film producer from Newnan, Georgia. Jim Pace is co-founder of Group 6, a real estate and construction firm with more than 40 years' experience in the business world. And Arnall Rod Thomas is a U.S. Navy veteran with multiple advanced degrees specializing in education. Now, let's meet our panelist. Sarah Campbell is a news reporter for the Newnan Times-Herald. Tom Crawford is the editor and main reporter for the Georgia Report, a daily political news source covering Georgia. And Elly is an award-winning journalist for WABE 90.1, where she focuses on immigration, race, and refugees. Tonight's debate will consist of 3 rounds. For more information on the rules for each round, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website, atlantapressclub.org. Now, let's get started. In the first round, each candidate will be asked one question by one of our panelists. The candidates have 60 seconds to answer the question. But first, I'm going to take moderator privilege and ask all of these candidates if you could tell me by a show of hands, because this week the dust somewhat settled on the GOP side in the race for President of the United States. So I would like for you to, I'm going to give you the answers, either A, raise your hand if you will support the presumptive nominee, Donald Trump. Raise your hand if no, you will not support the nominee, Donald Trump, presumptive. Or raise your hand if you have not made a decision. Let's see who supports Mr. Trump. 7 out of 7. I guess we can stop there. Elly, you get the first question.
Okay. Mr. Thomas, you said that one of the top 5 issues for you is to bring federal money to the 3rd District, and you say bring more jobs. You've also spoken about a commuter rail system that would connect Atlanta to the 3rd District. What other projects do you intend to fight for?
Mr. Thomas, that was a question for you.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question? I couldn't hear.
Sure. You, on your campaign website, you said one of the top issues for you is to bring federal money to the 3rd District, to bring jobs there. And you've also spoken about wanting to bring a commuter rail line from Atlanta.
Well, we send a lot of money to Washington, and it's time we bring it back to the district.
So what would you want to see?
So building projects, the more money we can build and build projects and send it back to the district, the more jobs will be created.
Can you talk a little bit about the rail system?
Well, one of the things I have is the fact that we could actually have MARTA expanded all the way to Newnan, from Newnan to Fayetteville, and maybe to Griffin.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Sarah, you get the next question.
Mr. Ferguson, if you could be sure of achieving one and only one thing in your first term in Congress, what would that be? Sort of your ultimate dream goal?
First and foremost would be to revive the American economy. We are suffering as a nation, and this district is suffering because of job loss. And we have to do the things necessary to get Americans back to work, particularly those here in the 3rd District. We must focus on tax reform and creating a healthy tax environment for our business community. We must focus on removing the regulations that are so burdensome to not only small businesses but to industry. And we must get the federal education department out of the way and allow communities to tailor their educational needs to fit the job opportunities that exist in their communities.
Thank you very much. Tom, it is now your turn to ask a question of Richard Mix.
Mr. Mix, I understand you have a background in the film production business. As you probably know, the film industry people were urging Governor Deal to veto the religious liberty bill, which he did. Given your background, I wondered if you felt the same way. Do you think it was a good idea for Governor Deal to veto that, or did you disagree with his decision?
No, I absolutely agree with Governor Deal's veto, and I agree with it on 2 different grounds. One is that we are granted unalienable rights by our Creator, and that supersedes any government regulation or control of the situation. So in that end, I feel that we shouldn't allow government to engage in that, because once they're engaged in these rights, then those are rights that the government can then in turn take away. On the second front of that, I don't think that we need more legislation. It's always politicians' answer to regulate, and legislate. And I think that in this case, we don't need more legislation. We need to take the laws that we already have on the books and take the First Amendment and use that to answer the issue at hand.
Thank you. Elly, you may now ask a question of Chip Flanegan.
Mr. Flanegan, I wanted to just jump off that question. What do you think of the governor's veto on the religious freedom legislation, and do you agree with Mr. Mix?
No, I don't necessarily agree with Mr. Mix. One of the problems, and this is a typical problem for all federal legislators, they get used to doing what business demands of them. And Governor Deal was a Washington politician before he came back to run Georgia. The business community came out and used their clout to put pressure on the governor. And Christian right and pastors have come to me and asked me what the cure to that was. I told them, use your power just like you did at Chick-fil-A. When they came out against Chick-fil-A, the community came by and supported Chick-fil-A. And they need to do the same things. If they want the governor to listen to them, they need to use the same economic powers to get their way.
Sarah, you may now ask a question of Samuel Anders.
Mr. Anders, we often hear comments about how terrible socialized medicine is. As someone who grew up in the UK around a socialized medicine system, could you talk about the pros and cons of a system like that?
Yes, ma'am. For simple things like a cold, if you need to go to the doctor, for just simple procedures, simple things like that, it on the surface it looks like a good thing. The delays in the doctor's office are no greater or worse than what we currently have right now. It's when you look at the bigger picture and how things get on a larger scale. If you need a major procedure, you end up on a waiting list along with everybody else, and there's no real choice. There's no real options for you to go out there and actually choose a different provider or a different institution to perform that procedure.
Tom, you may now ask a question of Mike Crane.
Senator Crane, you made a very provocative comment when you were talking about policemen who serve no-knock warrants. You said, and I quote, "If you come to my house, kick down my door, if I have an opportunity, I will shoot you dead." Would you please clarify or explain what you meant to say by that?
Well, I appreciate you, Tom, raising that question and raising the issue, because it's very, very important for all Georgians to understand clearly what the role of government is. Can they come inside our house and kick down our doors? And my comments specifically talk to the point that I believe I would never advocate harming anyone who didn't threaten my family. And so there was no direct implication by my words that I would ever harm any police. I love the police community. I'm a big supporter of law enforcement. My father's served on 2 police forces. My uncle's been a chief of police. So I'm a great supporter of law enforcement. It's a necessary part of our government process. We, as senators, we legislate. As congressmen, we'll legislate. We need the law enforcement component to do its part. The question is, what in our Constitution allows government to kick down our doors without knocking?
Thank you. Government to kick down our doors. You can hold that thought. Thank you very much. Elly, you get one last question in this first round, and it is to go to Jim Pace.
Hi, Mr. Pace. You said on your campaign website that it's time to make some tough decisions about the U.S.'s budget, saying cutting wasteful spending is a good first step, but that government must also eliminate billions of dollars in failed government programs and redundant agencies. I wanted to ask you specifically, what programs or agencies would you want to eliminate, and how do you propose to fill those services if needed?
Well, I personally am a proponent of fair tax, and if we can adopt the fair tax, the first one we can get rid of is the Internal Revenue Service. I'm a big supporter of the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment, as you know, gives specific powers to the government and reserves the rest for the states. And so I would be a big proponent of getting rid of Obamacare, getting the government out of the insurance business, getting them out of the healthcare business, getting them out of the educational business. Those rights are reserved for the local communities. There's quite a few of them, if you really think about it, that we can, in fact, get rid of, and in the process save a lot of money. But I'll also tell you that we're not going to balance the budget by just cutting spending. We're also going to have to grow the economy. We're going to have to bring back the jobs that we've lost and stimulate the GDP. If we can't get the GDP back up into the 4% range, we're not going to get the balanced budget by simply cutting programs.
Thank you, Mr. Pace. That concludes our first round. In the second round, each candidate will ask one question of the opponent of his choice. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond to a question, and then 30 seconds for a rebuttal. By random selection, Richard Mix, you get the first question.
Okay. I want to follow up a little more on the question you asked us originally, and this question is of Senator Mike Crane. Mike, as you know, I've been a long-standing supporter of Donald Trump. I'm the only candidate in the race that has been publicly endorsing him, and I've been doing that even before I was a candidate in this race. At the recent 3rd District GOP convention, you stood hand in hand with the Stop Trump establishment and worked to get
to the question, please.
Okay, the question is, do you feel that it was right that we sent 3 cruise delegates to, or we sending 3 cruise delegates to Ohio to represent the 3rd District when Trump carried 155 of 159 counties in all 13 counties?
Okay, Mr. Crane, your answer.
Richard, thanks for the question. As I indicated early on, that I will support the Republican nominee, who we think at this point in time will be Donald Trump, and he'll have my full support.
All right. You have 30 seconds for a rebuttal, Mr. Mix.
Well, as I said, Donald Trump carried all 13 counties in this district by nearly 40%, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page with that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Chip Flanegan, you get the second question.
Well, my question is also for Senator Crane. Senator Crane, in your changing immigration stands, you have been for a path to citizenship and have made fun of candidates supporting a wall around their sandbox, your words. And your latest, you're not for rounding them up and putting them on buses. Do you stand for deportation or some sort of legalization, and in what time frame?
When it comes to immigration, I think we have laws on the books, if they are properly enforced, that will help in our problem with illegal immigration. I do not support amnesty in any way, shape, or form. And I believe that a limited immigration policy, I think we should see an actual reduction in the number of legal immigrants we let into the country as we address the economic pressures all Americans are facing right now.
And you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal, sir.
Yes, Senator, your changing stands reflect your needs for cheap labor in your day job as a general contractor. I know as a supplier to the construction industry, those jobs were done by native-born American workers until the Olympics in the 1990s. Now, I know those jobs are sorely missed by the Americans that have lost them.
Senator, I can offer you a 30-second rebuttal to his rebuttal of your answer.
I don't know. I was getting some concrete ready and finishing some concrete Monday morning at 7 o'clock. I don't look like immigrant labor, so I support all Americans' right to work in this country.
All right, and now it is your opportunity, sir, to ask a question of the opponent of your choice.
Well, I mean, there's several things that come to mind. I was going to ask Sam. I really could ask anybody, but I've got to ask Drew just because he's standing next to me.
Well, let's ask, please.
Do you like loafers or boots?
Mike, I wear what's appropriate at the time.
Very good.
All right, and I take it you rebuttal to that, or you're just good to go?
I'm a boots guy.
Oh, you're a boots guy. All right, then. Well, thank you very much. Now, let's see. Samuel Anders, you have an opportunity to ask a question of the opponent of your choice.
Yes, ma'am, and this is for Mr. Pace. You have said that you are a strong supporter of the military. What is the single biggest obstacle facing military spouses today?
You know, I think that there are a number of obstacles facing this. You're specifically asking about the spouses.
He did, yes.
Okay, I think that one of the biggest issues facing the spouses today is that the veterans returning home from the war are having an increasingly hard time to find jobs when they return. And so when they do return, they need to be able to be incorporated into the fabric of our society.
And you have an opportunity for a rebuttal.
No, ma'am.
All right, then. We will move on. Rod Thomas, Mr. Thomas, sir, it is your opportunity to ask a question to the opponent of your choice.
Thank you, Ms. Pressley. I would like to ask Mr. Crane a question. And that, I'm sorry, Mr. Crane, this is the third one. But I'd like to ask about the Religious Freedom Act that was supported by mostly the conservatives, and of course our governor vetoed it. And I want to know, you know, he says that they're going to bring it up next year, they're going to be stronger, and they still want the Religious Freedom Act. And I do not support it. I think that we're really are discriminating when we do put it into effect.
Okay, and now
I'd like to know what Mr. Crane thinks, why he wants to keep it going.
Yes.
I have long been and always will be a champion for religious liberty, Rod. You know that. It's very clear in my position in the Senate and just as an American. It's enumerated as our first liberty. It's our most important liberty. And the day when government can come and trample upon that liberty, every freedom is at risk, my friend. Every single freedom will be at risk. And the day has come. If it weren't for RFRA at the federal level, Hobby Lobby would not have been victorious between a tilted and slanted Supreme Court. So we need those protections in place because our judicial system is out of control.
Okay, now time for
Well,
your
religious
rebuttal.
freedom is one thing, but I mean, this is a bill about, you know, gay people going to the bathroom. I think going to the bathroom is a natural act, and I think everybody should have the freedom to do that, you know. And I just think we would be discriminating against the gay community.
Thank you.
I think he's
Okay.
referencing a North Carolina bill that's not tied to the legislation we passed this year.
All right, and that was your rebuttal. I appreciate that clarification. Jim Pace, you now have an opportunity to ask a question of one of your opponents.
Well, I'd like to ask Sergeant Anders. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your service to our nation. And just as a follow-up, we've already talked about the fact that the veterans returning are having a hard time finding jobs when they get back. In this term of the Georgia General Assembly, legislatures approved House Bill 443, a veterans job bill. Do you think someone that voted against that bill to help returning veterans get jobs in Georgia could be trusted to protect veterans' interests in Washington?
Okay, there we go.
I don't know the specifics of the bill, but I think at the end of the day, what we need is a big support of our veterans coming home, regardless whatever shape it takes. We need to be supporting them through the VA, through jobs, through assisted health care within the VA. But actually, really, you know what, let me step back. I think the VA completely needs to go. We need to reform that entire situation, and we need to grow our military to a point where we can continue to protect our borders. That's what I have, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and you have an opportunity to rebut his answer.
I would just like to clarify that Senator Crane was the only member of the General Assembly in either chamber to vote against this veterans jobs bill. The bill was sponsored by our only World War II veteran in the House, John Yates, and an Iraqi and Afghanistan veteran in the Senate. And so it troubles me that we have the only guy voting against the veterans running for this congressional seat.
And since you were named Senator, you have an opportunity to rebut the rebuttal.
Well, I appreciate that. You'll see that oftentimes I do stand alone when the issues of liberty come about. And as a son of a Marine, I honor our vets and Sam's service currently. The reality of that bill, it's a distortion of the law, and it doesn't provide for equal treatment under the law. And so I get the impression, Mr. Pace, that you'll be glad to use the law to distort all kinds of marketplaces and job places in order to benefit one group over another.
Time. Thank you very much. At this point, the last question in this round goes to Mr. Loafers himself. I assume you're wearing loafers. I forgot to look. Drew Ferguson.
I am today. My question is for Sam Anders. And Sam, if you could please tell us your preference on between a fair tax and a flat tax and why.
I think it's a great opportunity for us to have two ideas out there. I will have to say just right off the bat that I'm a bigger proponent for the flat tax. Unfortunately, when you look at the fair tax, I think there's a big if on whether or not we could implement that. We would need 2/3 vote in the House and in the Senate, and then it would need to be ratified for us to repeal income tax. And I just don't think that that's going to happen. I think we need to move to something that we need an achievable goal. So an achievable goal would be flat tax, something that we could at least move forward with, simplify the tax code, and make it better for Americans.
Your rebuttal?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Now, for those of you just joining us, this is the debate between the Republican candidates in Georgia's 3rd Congressional District. We are now moving into our third and final round. In this round, each panelist will ask a question to the candidate of his or her choice until we run out of time. I will determine when a rebuttal is appropriate. Sarah, you get the first question.
Thank you. I would actually like each candidate to answer this question. I suppose we'll start with Mr. Anders and just go down. The battle for access to medications derived from marijuana has been a pretty dominant issue in Georgia over the past 3 years, particularly in the 3rd District where we have a lot of activists for this medication. The biggest impediment to greater research on the benefits of medications derived from marijuana and greater access to these products is that marijuana is considered Schedule I by the federal government, which considers it to be a product with a high potential for abuse and no medical uses whatsoever. The DEA is considering rescheduling marijuana in the next few months. What would you do in Congress to get marijuana rescheduled or descheduled? Or would you make this a priority? Why or why not?
Yes, ma'am. And the reason I would make it a priority is because on a healthcare kind of issue, and that's what we need to look at really, this is for individuals that have debilitating conditions where it would truly help. And I think that's where we need our focus to be, is making sure that it becomes another medication that we have access to, that individuals within our state have access to. And I think it needs to come back probably down from the federal level to a state level and let the state decide on whether or not that is a good thing for the individuals of that state.
Senator Crane, you're on the classification of marijuana.
Yes. As a senator, I helped advance this issue a couple years ago when we opened up the framework to make that possible for those of our community who see a benefit from marijuana derivatives. At the federal level, I have to say that I believe it's a state's issue, but at the federal level, there are overlapping issues just because of interstate commerce, and I would fully support the rescheduling of it as a Schedule II.
Mr. Ferguson.
Yes, I would also support rescheduling marijuana to a Schedule II. We have thousands upon thousands of Georgians that are suffering right now, and we have access to potential research through cannabis oil that could help these. As a practicing dentist, every day I prescribe medications that are far more addictive and have more side effects than cannabis oil. We need to get on board with this. This needs to happen, and we need to provide relief to so many Georgians and Americans that are suffering right now.
Chip Flanegan, where do you stand on the medical marijuana issue?
I just concur with what the others have said. It's ridiculous to have one particular drug that is hands off, walls around, when there are benefits that people can get from the use.
Richard Mix.
I think we all on this stage stand together on this issue. I would encourage anyone that doesn't agree with us to sit down across from the parents of children who suffer from afflictions and seizures and listen to what they have to say about it. And I think you'd find you'd all be on the same page with the rest of us.
Jim Pace, that's your point of view?
No, well, actually, it is. It is more or less. This is a medical issue. This is for the medical doctors to advise us what it does and doesn't do. And if they determine that it has beneficial effects, then I would support them recommending a change. I would not support making it a priority. With $19 trillion in debt and a nuclear Iran, I've got other priorities, but it certainly is something that bears consideration.
And Rod Thomas, you get the final word on this issue.
This has been an education for me because we've had about 10 to 15 different forums, and people coming up afterwards have really hit this subject. They don't want to go to Colorado. Several of them told me that they have to go to Colorado. And so I would be for moving it to a lower schedule rather than a Schedule 2. And I would definitely be for it because medically, well, first of all, look, it's prescription drugs, the painkillers. I mean, that's one of the big problems now. It's worse than the marijuana. So doctors need to look at this. I mean, this is helping, not hurting, where the pain drugs are really, hurting Americans.
Thank you very much. Tom, it is now your turn to ask a question.
Question for Mr. Flanegan. You indicated a few minutes ago that you, like everybody else, is supporting Donald Trump in the presidential race. And as you probably know, Mr. Trump made the statement a while back that a woman who has an abortion should go to jail, that it's a criminal offense. I was curious if you agreed or disagreed with that particular statement and why.
Well, thank you for that question. Actually, I think it was raised as a hypothetical. Hypothetically, if abortions were illegal, would women be arrested, or would they be charged, or would they be convicted? Would they go to jail? Well, hypothetically, it would depend on what somebody made it. It's not really for the candidate to choose. If you're asking me hypothetically, do I agree with that? Absolutely not. I don't agree with that. My stance on abortion is I believe that there is a right to life and it begins at conception. I also believe that the life of the mother should always be protected, and I believe and strongly advocate for that exception.
Elly, you may now ask a question of one of our candidates.
Mr. Crane, within the first 100 days of president, if elected, Trump says he would build have a design for a wall between U.S. and Mexico and implement a ban on all Muslim immigration. House Speaker Ryan has spoken out against the Muslim immigration ban, saying the proposal was, quote, not conservatism. I'm curious what your thoughts are on these proposals.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see if he has the first 100 days or not. But the concept about immigration and whether the wall is the sole answer to that, it's just part of a broader answer. And being a blanket ban on Muslims is nonsensical, I believe. And so I think smart immigration policy is one where we as a nation, we pick who we allow to come here. We have no obligation to open our doors to anybody that chooses to cross our borders. We as a nation have an obligation to secure those borders and to make sure that Americans have the opportunities to access what this great nation has to offer. So we'll see what proposals he puts forward, and then we'll have a better opportunity to analyze those and make an assessment at that point.
Sarah.
Senator Crane, you have said in the past that the government is impinging on our freedoms.
Numerous times.
So I'd like for you to please provide some specific examples of how the federal government and or the state of Georgia, but not any other states, are impinging on our freedoms.
Well, the federal government right now is considering regulatory action by the EPA that's going to call every ditch in Georgia their territory. And that's a regulatory taking of property. When the federal government says I have to buy health insurance or pay a tax, that is an intrusion into my life. When the federal government comes along and says what I can and can't believe about what God says in His Word, that's an intrusion in my life. They tell me how much things should cost, what the fuel economy should be in my cars. I mean, the list goes on, and I don't think 90 cents will do it justice for the injustices being done by our government against the free people at the state and federal level.
Tom Crawford, you have a question for one of the candidates.
Yes. Mayor Ferguson, I know you have talked a lot about your role in helping bring the Kia motor plant to West Point. I'm sure you know that state and local governments gave something like $400 million worth of exemptions, motivations, all sorts of goodies like that to get Kia to come. My question is, as someone I know who believes in conservative values, wouldn't it have been better to let the forces of the free market determine whether a certain company comes to your city or not, rather than throwing a lot of money at them, which some people might argue is corporate welfare? I'm just interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
Sure. I grew up in a community that was incredibly healthy. We had a strong manufacturing backbone, and we lost that. And when you live in a community that has lost its manufacturing backbone and jobs are very, very scarce, and you're elected as mayor, you will do what you can to put people back to work. Unfortunately, we don't have a level playing field. We make this the most expensive nation in America to do business. We tax our corporations at the highest level, we overregulate them, and we fail them with our education system. We have to do more and more to create a positive business environment nationwide. And until such time as there is a level playing field, I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure that Georgians in the 3rd District have access to great jobs.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Elly, you have a question for a candidate.
Mr. Mix, I think you were the first, you said you were one of the first candidates to endorse Trump as president earlier today. And one of the first things he did propose was deporting 11 million undocumented immigrants out of the country, 400,000 that live here in Georgia. What do you think about that policy? And if you agree, how would you intend to pay for that?
You speaking specifically to deportation?
Deportation.
No, I
mass
don't.
deportation.
I think it's no, it's not a realistic scenario that we can deport all the people. The number one step in comprehensive immigration reform is securing the border. Until we can secure the border and properly vet the people that are coming here and assure my family, my friends, and my community that we're safe, then everything else is off. So the number one step would be to secure the border. I would not support a mass deportation. We have to look at ways to put a system in place that can deal with that, but first we have to secure the border.
Thank you very much. Sarah Campbell, a question for one of the candidates.
I have a question that is for anyone who may like to answer it. We often hear about burdensome regulations on business. When we talk about how to improve the economy, everyone talks about getting rid of regulations. It's easy to talk about these regulations. Most of these regulations were put in place at some time for a reason that somebody thought was a good idea. Could you address specific types of regulations that you think can be removed without causing damage?
Mr. Thomas, why don't we start with you down on the far end of the panel?
Well, I'm very pragmatic. I'm not dogmatic. And I think regulations are dogmatic. They set up things as the way that they should be, and they want to enforce them, and they want them to come down. I want to work for the 3rd District and do their problems and weigh every problem, and not, I'm not obliged to be, I'm not a party guy. I'm not for the president. I'm not, I don't want to be, in the pocket of anyone. I'm working for the citizens of the 3rd District. And so to remove regulations, I think we need to set up a committee of people in the district and work on that problem in the district. I don't think it'll ever be solved in Washington. You can go to Washington and argue all day long about all these regulations and everything. That's what they do, okay? But we need to take care of it in the district. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're going to hear from each of you on this issue. So, yes, Mr. Pace.
This is not an issue to be resolved in the district. This is an issue to be resolved in Washington, D.C. And I'll just give you a few examples of the ones that really bug me. For every law that Congress passes, we have bureaucrats that pass about 60 regulations. So for every one law, 60 regulations. And the ones that really trouble me are the ones that do, in fact, infringe upon our freedoms. For example, a pastor speaking his heart on a Sunday morning can lose his IRS tax exemption because of an IRS ruling, not a congressional ruling. or another, you could have situations where the individual that's hiring legal immigrants, doesn't get it quite right. There's so many cases where we can eliminate regulations without eliminating the constitutional laws that created them.
Hold that thought. Richard Mix, you have a minute on this question.
I'm a small business owner, and in the last 21 years, I've owned and operated 4 small businesses, and I've dealt with a lot of different organizations from OSHA to the EPA across the board, and we spend a disproportionate amount of time just trying to deal with these issues to try and survive and make the company be vibrant. I would say that one other thing that I should add to something that Mr. Ferguson said earlier, and that is the third component, is a lot of this regulation creates uncertainty, and uncertainty in a business environment creates mediocrity. So if you don't know, for example, they're passing healthcare reform when they don't even know what's in there, certainly businesses don't know what impact that's going to have on them in the future, so it's going to tend to make them to force to sit idle instead of moving forward and growing and making decisions that could help move the economy forward. So we have to not only get rid of regulation, but also increase the certainty of the environment that we live in and we vive in.
Chip Flanegan, you have a minute on this issue.
Let me just give you one that we all can relate to pretty easily. It's a little in the weeds, but the 08 market meltdown was caused because of the subprime mortgage, which was pushed out by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We all suffered in our homes and our businesses. The government came along to fix that. They passed Dodd-Frank, which in Dodd-Frank, they implemented what they called mark-to-market accounting for all banks. That's what caused all the banking failures in Georgia, because you had a performing loan. That's what they called it. You're making your payments, but it comes up for renewal. Well, it won't pass renewal because it's no longer worth $200,000. Now, we buy a car off the lot every day, and it's not worth what it was when we paid for it. We're upside down. We all understand that. But the federal government said that all banks had to your house, you owe $400,000 on it. It's only worth $200,000. I need $200,000 to renew your loan. Now, who has $200,000 sitting around? He's making his payment.
Time. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mayor, your minute on this topic.
Sure, I'll give you some specific examples of things that I deal with every day in my dental practice. There are rules from OSHA and Health and Human Services regarding HIPAA and the Privacy Acts that just simply don't make sense for small business. They add tremendous regulatory cost and thus increase the cost of doing business, and I have to pass those costs along to my patients. I'll also tell you healthcare. What has happened with the Affordable Health Care Act is costing Americans jobs. On a grander scale, just look at the EPA. Administratively, they are going to ruin the coal industry. And last night, over the last couple of nights, we have seen Secretary Clinton's statements about how she is going to rid America of the coal industry. And she is going to destroy the fabrics of lives of thousands of Americans whose livelihoods depend on that. And all I can think of is here we go again. Bad Washington policy, bad regulation, destroying American jobs and families.
Thank you, sir. Mike Crane on regulations.
Well, just to not talk on some of the other points, but the Social Security Administration is considering a rule right now of making it mandatory that they report all possible references to mental health issues with recipients to the FBI master database. And this has something to do with the potential of gun ownership for folks who may have just the simplest diagnosis of anxiety or stress. That should be very concerning for all Americans. The regulatory oversight by unelected bureaucrats in this nation is choking the life out of our economy.
And finally, Samuel Anders on regulations, ones you would get rid of.
Ma'am, I think this alludes to a bigger thing, and the bigger thing would be representation. I think if we don't have great representation and we don't inform the individuals of what's going on and what the regulations are, then how can they make an educated decision? At the end of the day, as a congressman, it is not only a position to go and vote for your constituents, but it's also a position for you to educate them on what there is actually going on and what they need to be aware of, and then let them decide and let them vote on what regulations need to stay and which need to go.
All right. Thank you very much. Tom Crawford, a question, sir.
Question for Mr. Pace. One of the things Donald Trump has proposed, as is well known, is to build a wall along the border between the U.S. and Mexico and make Mexico pay for it. I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, do you think a wall of that scale could feasibly be built? And how exactly would you propose to make the Mexican government pay for it, if you would just take a moment and share your thoughts on that?
I'll be glad to share my thoughts on that, but they may not directly address your question, because I don't know that I would give the answer that Mr. Trump has given. I am a big proponent of securing the borders. I think it's the number one thing that we need to do. I think we have the technology in place right now to secure the borders. If you use Google Earth on your phone, you know you can dial in and look right down at just about anything that you want. There's lots of technology out there to do what needs to be done. So I would propose that we change the policies a bit, and that we have the capability to do it right now. We don't have the will to do it right now. So I would implement policies that would put in place immediately, the ability to not only close that border, but the others as well. The problem we have is that the legal immigration has created the illegal immigration problem with people overstaying their visas, and we don't go after them.
All right. Thank you very much. Elly, you have an opportunity to ask a question now.
This is a question for Mr. Ferguson and Senator Crane. Georgia has become somewhat of a model across the country for criminal justice reform, bipartisan criminal justice reform. The U.S. Senate works through its own version right now, and there has been some opposition from Senator Perdue from Georgia. I wanted to know what your thoughts are on the federal piece of legislation.
We'll start with you, Mr. Crane.
I'd have to reply, Elly. I'm not familiar with that actual federal piece of legislation that's pending right now. I have been on Judiciary Non-Civil for the last 2 years, and it's a very dynamic environment. We're recognizing that all crime does not deserve a jail sentence, and we're moving and making great strides in Georgia to reform that. Nonviolent crime is not best deterred by sticking folks in jail. And in just recent history, Georgia was one of I think the statistic was about 1 in 14 Georgians was under state supervision. We had too many people in our system that could be helped otherwise. I think we've made some great strides. I look forward to looking at the legislation you reference and being able to comment on that in the future.
And Mr. Ferguson, you were also asked to answer this question.
Yes, obviously what we've been doing is not working. It's not working for our economy. It's not working for our Americans. And having criminal justice reform is something that I do support, and I applaud Governor Deal's efforts to those ends. I will say this. I think that we've got to do a much better job of making sure that we reduce the criminal rate and criminal activity. We've got to do things with our education system, allowing local governments to have control of that, creating a healthy economy, and making sure that we have a real American dream for many Americans. Let's give folks an opportunity. Let's applaud them when they succeed, and when they stumble and they fail, let's do our part to help get them back on as part of that American dream.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Sarah Campbell, you have a question for one of our candidates.
We were almost out of time. Mr. Pace, I'd like to follow up with you a bit on the medical marijuana issue. You stated that it should be a matter between a patient and their doctor, and I'm not sure that you understand that because the federal government considers it to have no medical use, that prevents most doctors from having the freedom to
I did not
discuss
mean to,
that with their patients. So
I did not mean to imply that it was between a patient and the doctor. I said it is between the medical community at the national level. The FDA needs to declassify it based upon empirical evidence of its effectiveness. And if that can be documented, I said I would support it.
Thank you for that clarification.
All right, then. Tom, you have one more question for us.
Okay. Senator Crane, last year, as you remember, the Senate was considering the motor fuel tax increase. And I think you were one of the few legislators who actually stood up to the leadership and pushed back a little bit. You said it was a, quote, midnight run on the Georgia taxpayer. I'd like you to elaborate on that a little bit, because I think what you said had a lot to do with how business is done in the Senate and how certain types of bills get through. Could you explain to us why you did consider this a midnight run on the Georgia taxpayer?
Well, Tom, you have a unique perspective, getting to sit in the back of the chamber and watch it go on. And those last few days really come down to some very dangerous things at midnight for Georgians. When legislation that we've not ever seen before hits the table, and at that time we only had, I think in the Senate, we had changed the rules where we had as much as 2 hours to review that legislation. And there were all kinds of special carve-outs and I would call them paybacks and political favors that were aimed at certain industries. And I don't support that type of government. It's a broken policy. It's a broken framework. And my goal is to change that. No more vending machine politics. No more put in the money, pull the levers, and push the buttons, and you get what you want. Americans deserve better than that. They deserve faithful representation in Washington.
All right, thank you very much. I've got a question for each of the candidates. On Tuesday, the governor vetoed another controversial piece of legislation that was passed through the legislature, and that was the campus carry legislation. 30 seconds each, sirs. And I'll start with you, Mr. Anders. Was he right to veto that bill?
No, ma'am, I don't believe he was. I think when we have these gun-free zones, individuals that are criminals, that are evil, are always going to come in and have that opportunity to do evil things. If we don't provide an opportunity for our daughters and for our children in general just to protect themselves, I think that's just a very bad thing. And when you look at it specifically, you had to be over the age of 21 and you had to have a concealed carry permit. And I think that justifies enough.
Thank you very much. Senator Crane, was he right or wrong to veto the bill?
The governor was definitely wrong to veto the bill against the wishes of strong votes from both the House and the Senate. And I think his arguments for his reasoning for his veto were definitely off point. The fact that we, as law-abiding citizens with Georgia weapons carry permits, are excluded from public places to have those weapons, those equalizing force in the case of an attack, I think he's mistaken, and he's telegraphed to the criminal community.
He was not right to do that.
That's right.
All right. Mr. Ferguson, would you have vetoed the bill or would you have signed it?
I would have signed the legislation. Governor Deal was wrong to veto that bill. I have a son at college, and I had a daughter that was at college before she joined the United States Navy. Their right to defend themselves does not end in an arbitrary line drawn by a college administrator. We need to protect the Second Amendment rights, and my children need to be safe on campus.
Mr. Flanegan, do you agree with his veto of the bill?
I do not agree with his veto, and I believe that, as the others have expressed, I'm old enough to remember when the drinking ages were lowered because military people were forced to serve, and they said, "Hey, if you're old enough to go and fight, you're old enough to drink." And this is the same thing. If we're taking military draftees at 18, then these people have concealed carry permits, and there has never ever had an issue with a concealed carry permit holder.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mix. Young people, brains not fully developed, alcohol, guns. Would you have vetoed the bill?
I disagree with Governor's veto, and I think if you look at the statistics, then that shows everything you need to know. I mean, the facts are that in a gun-free environment, we're not safe, so we need to stand up to the Second Amendment. Stand up for the Second Amendment.
Jim Pace, you agree with the other candidates on this issue?
I do. I'm a very strong supporter of gun rights. I believe that the most unsafe place you can possibly be is a gun-free zone. And if you look at the situation rationally, the people that carry those permits are the most law-abiding citizens that we have. Thank goodness we have them. And my feeling about guns is if you know how many guns you have, you don't have enough.
All right, Rod Thomas, final word on this topic.
I sent an email immediately to Governor Deal thanking him and expressing the fact that I didn't think North Carolina and Mississippi would even see the light of day, even though they passed and have been signed. So, I definitely lean towards that way. With the guns, I don't think guns, being an educator, I would never want guns in the colleges and universities.
All right. I do think that that is now all the time that we have for questions. It is now time to move to the last part of our program. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to make a closing statement. Jim Pace, you get the first closing statement, sir.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And I would like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for hosting us today. Again, I'm Jim Pace. I'm a businessman. I've been a businessman for 44 years. I'm a family man. I've been married to my sweet wife for 44 years as well. I'm a constitutional conservative. It grieved me when Anthony Scalia passed away. Most importantly, I'm a Christian, and I believe that the country was founded on biblical Christianity, and we need to build our hope on that foundation. That's who I am, but let me tell you who I'm not. I'm not a politician. I did not wake up 10 years ago and think, wow, I just need to get my name on a ballot somewhere. I don't need the commute. I don't need another line on my resume. I need to be able to look my 8 grandchildren in the eye and say I did what I could to restore hope and a future for this great country of ours. I see reckless spending, and I'm out of time, but I'll just tell you that spending.
Thank you very much. Then you acknowledge that you were out of time.
Hmm.
We will move on now. Drew Ferguson, you get a closing statement.
Thank you, and thanks to the Atlanta Press Club and to the folks asking the questions. Thank you very much. I learned a long time ago and at a very early age that service was the cornerstone to our society and as a part of my faith. And it is what led me to practice dentistry. It's what led me to run for mayor of my hometown and to stay engaged. But I have watched Washington produce bad decisions year after year that have almost destroyed my hometown of West Point. For 20 years, hope faded to black, and our community almost died. Our businesses dried up, our civic clubs almost withered away, our schools began to fail, and we saw the fabric of our community torn apart. And we're not going to do that anymore. We are going to go to Washington to fix this. We're going to restore the American dream. I firmly believe that the things that we've been able to do in West Point, the progress that we have made with jobs, revitalizing the community, bringing the community together, we can do that in Washington.
Thank you very much, sir. Mike Crane, it's your turn to make your closing statement.
Thank you, and thank you to the Atlanta Press Club. Friends, between now and May 24th, we are going to pick a representative for the 3rd District. The question is, what kind of representative are they going to be, and who are they actually going to represent? Will it be big corporations, moneyed special interests? Will it be the politically well-connected? Or will they actually represent you and I? That is the question. Will they be a faithful representative of our district? And will they be faithful to the Constitution? For the last 5 years, I have been a faithful representative. I have been a voice and a champion for liberty that's hard to match if you just look purely at a voting record. But if you knew what happened behind the scenes in the conversations that were had, you would certainly see that I have been a faithful representative in that regard. I do want to get up there and help save our nation, and I ask you to help me do that May 24th.
Thank you very much, sir. Richard Mix.
America is the greatest country on earth, and we've had some problems lately, and I think it's time that we get those back on the right direction. As you've seen, most of us on the stage are pretty much aligning on the issues. We agree on 80 to 90% of the questions that were asked. The question that the people need to ask is who do they want to choose to represent them? I am the outsider in this race. Of the front runners in this race, I'm the only one that has not held political office. I am a small businessman. I am someone who can take the values of the people within the 3rd District, take them to Washington, D.C. I am a regular guy, and I look forward to representing the people of the 3rd District in Washington, D.C.
And now we hear from Chip Flanegan.
Well, fellow Georgians, if you want another Washington PAC-controlled congressman, you need to vote for Mike Crane or Drew Ferguson. If you're more like crony capitalism, then Jim Pace or Drew again. But if you want the only candidate that has signed a pledge that refuses to accept Washington PAC money, then you got to vote for me. I'm the only debt-free small business owner that's running for this job. I can't be bought, I won't be sold, and I'd appreciate your vote in Washington.
Thank you very much. Rod Thomas, it's time for your closing remarks, sir.
This is a job that I would never have wanted and don't want now. But also I realize I have the skills to do the job, so the job needs me. I have the work ethic, I have the educational background, and I have the leadership skills. If you go to rodthomasforcongress.org, it's all there. So please check it out. If you don't like it, go on. But if you like it, roll up your sleeves, join me, and let's work on this thing in the district mainly, not in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And Samuel Anders, you get the final closing statement, sir.
Thank you for having us out today. I think when we look at this, you have to really look at it and say, it's not a job, it's a position. It's a position of trust, and the position means that we, or I, should represent you and take your voice to Washington. When you look back at the history and what everybody up here has done, for the last 16 years, I took an oath that said I would uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. So everybody that talks about the Constitution, have you said that you'll ultimately, at the end of the day, put your life on the line for that Constitution? I fight for the flag every single day, and that flag will drape my coffin on the day I die. Great representation is what you need, and great representation comes in the form of me.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. That concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that the primary elections will be held on Tuesday, May 24th, and early voting is already underway. Our thanks to the candidates and to our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging tonight's debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club and all of the debates the Press Club will host this primary election season, please visit atlantapressclub.org. Now, we want you to stay with us for the debate among the Democratic candidates for United States Senate. That's coming up next. I'm Condace Pressley. Thanks for joining us at the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. Good evening.